Hello guys, this is Ali and I am back with another Raid Shadow Legends video. For this video, we have a special guest, Wrigley, my clan leader, and he's very good at Hydra. He knows everything, and I just wanted to have him here to explain to you the mechanics of the heads, and we can have a nice friendly discussion about them and mention some of the good champions that we can use to counter those mechanics and counter those heads. Hi Wrigley, welcome to the channel.
Hey,
Thank you for being here. Um,
thank you for having me, Ali. This quite an introduction. I wouldn't say I'm good at Hydra. I'm quite involved in Hydra. There are many people here in our clan here, ST2 and the cluster that are put up much scarier and awesome hits than I do. But I'm definitely quite involved and really enjoy the content a lot. So it's definitely where my heart is in terms of raids. So yeah, very involved on Hydra for sure. So thank you
yeah.
for having me.
Well, I'm very happy to have you here. Okay, so without
Perfect.
further ado, let's just go get to the heads and talk about some of them and see what happens. Okay, so the first head that
Yeah,
we
sounds good.
okay, so the first head that we want to talk about is Head of Decay. Would you explain to like everyone how like what it does, and then we can just talk about like the other details.
Yeah, perfect. So the Head of Decay, that head, again, right now for us, I think we're on rotation, was it 6? It's spirit. So the affinities for each rotation will change, but the head's skills and what they do, those stay the same. It's just the only thing you'll have to be mindful of are just affinity changes. So yeah, the Head of Decay, he will always attack the enemy with the lowest HP. That's with his A1. He does 100% heal reduction. So he also destroys HP as well. That's part of his passive. So he will do a heal reduction, but then whenever champions on your team are healed, he also will destroy a little bit of their HP as well. So be mindful of that. His one of his two vices is a lot of healing reduction and destroying the HP of your team. The other, and the main reason why you would bring a provoker to your team, is he is susceptible to provoking, which is good because he does both a team-wide cleanse and a solo cleanse with a life barrier. And both of those move sets can be quite a pain in the butt to deal with, which is what a provoker makes a lot easier for. And then most importantly, too, his decapitation effect is when he is decapitated, a lot of your 30% of your champions' destroyed HP is it heals champions by 30% of their destroyed HP and restores 50% of it.
Yeah,
So yeah, getting him out of the way for a bunch of reasons, not just his cleanse, but also his healing reduction and his HP nuisance. Yeah, he's quite a head to deal with.
yeah, he's a very annoying one. Okay, so to
Yeah.
deal with this head, you mentioned provoke, right? So
Yes.
which
Yes.
champions would you recommend for like to deal with this head? Who would be like your best?
So again, going earlier to where the affinity changes do play a part in it slightly, especially when there's a lot of provokers that maybe they have a chance to provoke on their hit. That's something to be mindful of. Provokers that come to my mind, I'm just thinking of the ones that I use personally. Molly, I would argue, is probably an S tier Hydra provoker, probably the best.
I agree.
Um, if, yeah, if you got really deep pockets or very good luck, Chris is a great provoker as well. Even goes far down as someone who I used in my upcoming days of Hydra was Black Knight. Black Knight's stellar, but again,
Oh
he'd
yeah,
be a good example of where this rotation where Decay's spirit, Black Knight might struggle a bit being a force champion. Seeker, on the other hand, if you don't have a bad either team and you could go a bit crazy with your Seeker, not have him so speed tuned, Seeker would be great with him being magic. Each one of his hits, each hit itself has the chance to do the provoke, which is great.
yeah,
Husk is another one that's some good utility because he's an enemy max HP hitter and he could also provoke. And of course, you have the good old provoke set as
yeah.
well.
So I would mention some other people too. Bevold would be a very good option because he doesn't weak hit.
Yes.
He also gives you
Yes.
reach, and his A3 gives you some healing. Also, his A1 provokes, so he's a very nice one. But I would
Yes.
book him for sure. I would book him. Um,
Yes.
another
Worth
option
the
that I'm
look, by the way,
using,
too.
these days is Kantra, and she is awesome. Like I can't say
Yes.
how good she is, and she even
Yes.
provokes when she's provoked. That's so
Yes,
crazy.
the only caveat I'd argue with Cantrip, a minor one, would just be you need at least the 5 debuffs on
Yeah.
that head. I think it's 5, right? The 5 debuffs on the head to land.
I
So
think
I
it's
would
4
definitely
or 5.
say if she's in a, yeah, 4 or 5. So if you're in a team where you're stacking a lot of debuffs early and then she gets to goes, yeah, that's icing on the cake. But also touching on Bivald, absolutely, he's a fusion I regret not going for. Definitely
Yeah.
worth the books too. I know a lot of players, a lot of us, even me as someone who's been playing for 4 years, I'm free to play, but those legendary books are hard to come by. So you
Mm-hmm.
definitely don't want to feel like you wasted using them. So Bivald's a good one. Also, why I put Molly as S tier, another reason why Provoke Set is great, since the provokes are place, they will go through the cloud, which is
Yes.
awesome if for some reason, and that might be a head we're going to touch on later, but if you happen to get the toxic cloud that goes out there from the head of blight, to have a provoke that's a place instead of being based on a hit, because again, we know a lot of abilities, unless it's specified like Bivald's, you'll weak hit and you won't land a debuff off a weak hit. Yeah, that provoke set and Molly being able to go through the cloud, a place, clutch.
Yeah, for sure. Bevold and Molly and Cantor, both of them do the same. Like they don't
Yes,
weak it, so that's pretty amazing too. And
absolutely.
as you said, provoke set is pretty amazing, especially if you have like a Shamil in your team to boost your turn meter. We'll get to it later. Okay, so let's go to the next head, Head of Torment. So this head fears and it torments everybody. How do you
Yeah,
deal with this head? What does it exactly
living
do?
up living up to the namesake, to be sure, Head of Torment. So there's two ways to go about it. One way people might argue might be better than the other. That'd be using Shamail in the team,
Mm-hmm.
since Shamail's passive is he will kind of cleanse off the fears. He'll cut in, automatically go. He boosts the turn meter of the lead in your team. So again, we talked about earlier, touching on decay with the provoke set.
Yes.
Like I'll use my team as example. I use Mother Cybele, lovely Mama C. I have her on my team. She's my the person in the lead because she has that chunky speed aura. She's getting boosted by my Shamail constantly. So with her being the provoke set, she's getting more opportunities to go when there's more fears being out there. So that's a good chance to make her another viable solid provoker. She's a backup to my Molly, of course. But yeah, Shamail will instantly cleanse off the fears. So he's a very good option. And I mean, there's a few guys in the cluster that build Shamail as like the mischief tank. They'll put him in a guardian set so you can soak up some
Mm-hmm.
damage maybe from Wrath or a few of the other heads. There's a few of us, myself, I know our boy Matst, have DPS heavy Shamails. And Shamail is a sneaky DPS option. That A2 melts.
Yes.
So yeah, if you have a Shamail, Torment's quite an easy head to deal with. However, if you don't have a Shamail, or he might be on your B team or whatever, a Veil, perfect Veil, is another good way to deal with that, because then when you hit the Head of Torment, you don't have to worry about being feared if you're doing those hits from underneath the perfect Veil. But again, perfect Veil, not just a Veil. I was wondering why, when I was using my B team and I had Duchess bring someone back from reviving, why people would get instantly feared. I realized when she brings people back, they go under a veil, not a perfect veil. So that was a interesting little caveat that I learned the hard way when my team was getting feared into oblivion. But yes, the TLDR of it, pardon me, for dealing with the torment head is you have a Shamail who could cleanse it off, or you have a perfect veil to stop it from going there in the first place. If neither of those is an option to you, you could deal with RNG. I know some of us unfortunately have to, and I have to when my Shamail gets devoured.
Yeah.
But also cleansers, Doom Priest to Hanorok. Cleansers can help you. And again, it's not just Duchess too. I think you got Truath, who is a Dark Elf legendary. I believe he does solo perfect veils. And Rector is a amazing veil champion. She is, I'd argue, maybe one of those epics that's a legendary in purple clothing.
Oh yeah, Rector is pretty
Rector
amazing.
Draft is another great one. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So I have a few other mentions that I think are worth mentioning. One
Yes.
of them would be Tatora. He does hit
Yes.
hard. He gives you increased defense, helps you survive. Also, he gives himself a
Mhm.
shield and perfect veil to everybody, so that's nice. Um,
Yes.
and he like hits hard, so that's a bonus. There's another one that I've started using lately is Ragash. He does the veil on himself and your nuker, main nuker, the person that the most amount of um, has the most amount of attack. So that's pretty nice,
Mm,
but it's not enough. It's good, but it's not enough. So
right,
yeah,
right.
I would definitely either use Shamel or preferably Perfect Veil. Cleansing would be like the least preferable here. It's
Yes.
not
And
really amazing. And also, I
and another
didn't
one
know
too,
about
not
the
not
Veil.
right. And another thing too, not to get too far off topic, but it might be in our second part of the video when we discuss the Head of Mischief, unless he's on deck next, because I'm going to have to head stay. Oh, he is. Okay, and I'll touch on it briefly. But
Yeah.
Oboro, or self-veiling champions, Oboro,
Oh
Ninja,
yes.
if you're fortunate enough to be playing while you had a Ninja. Because then the other option would be you're in that Regash case. If you only had it where a limited amount of your champions can be under the veil, then you would probably use those champions to then nuke down the Head of Torment. Because as I
Yes.
didn't touch on early in the opening, he does fear, but also the decapitation effect is when you do decapitate him, it will instantly remove all the fears and true fears from your team, and then puts Perfect Veil out on two people on your team for 2 turns. And
Yes.
remember, another cool thing with Perfect Veil is when champions are under Perfect Veil, they also take reduced damage. So even having champions under a veil when Torment's not present can still pay dividends in reducing some damage and giving longevity to your team.
Okay. Sorry for the weird cut, guys. Okay, so we're back with the Head of Suffering. Uh, the tankiest head there is in Hydra. I don't have an issue with this head, but there's a lot of people that hate the guts of this head because of like his tricky extra turn that he has, and he just swallows the champ and just ruins your run. Okay, so
Mhm.
Wrigley, could you talk more in details about the Head of Suffering, what it does, and how we can like deal with him?
Oh, Head of Suffering, man. Where do we start with him? He's probably my most irritable Hydra head to deal with, honestly. And again, it's always going to depend on your team composition and for what caveat and things you're gonna have to deal with. But yeah, Suffering, he makes me suffer. I mean, yeah, he attacks all enemies as an AoE attack, places an irresistible weaken debuff. I actually didn't know that. And also, I didn't know that if you have a strengthen up on you, that you will not get the weaken. That if you have strengthen on that you will not get the weaken debuff to land on you. So that's
Yeah.
pretty cool. Checking that boss guide from time to time. But yeah, he does ally protection on
Hmm.
all the Hydra heads except for himself, and does a reflect damage on him. And he will provoke your champion that has the highest crit damage to hit him. So that's where your block buffs champion comes in handy, to block the ally protection so you're not losing damage, and to block reflect damage so your nuker is not nuking themselves. He also does a pain link debuff where he will put that on a person on your team, and all the Hydra heads that are taking damage, a little bit of that damage will go into the champion that he put pain link on. Kind of think of like a smaller version of Hex that the Hydra puts on
Yeah.
one of your champions. When you do hits, it goes into them. Um, yeah, Suffering is a pain in the butt. Also, because it's passive, he will increase the resistance of all the Hydra heads by 50. So just like how we talked about earlier with having a resistance tank and stacking up that resistance, accuracy to land your debuffs is just as equally important. And Suffering will increase the Hydra resistance for all the heads by 50. So he'll definitely up that. And then he'll also make the Hydra heads take 30% less AoE damage. So,
Yeah.
Ali, we hyped him up. You said you don't have a lot of issues dealing with Suffering. How can other people have the same luck as you? Tell us.
Well, for my Nightmare team, I use a single target hitter, which is Newt, and he
Mm-hmm.
loves having Suffering because the bigger the HP of the enemy is, the more he hits. So when you have
Oh yeah.
Suffering and you have Newt, you're fine. You're happy. Um, yeah, you're very happy if he's the good affinity. Um, Another like way you can deal with him is having like enemy max AoE max enemy max HP champions, and especially if you have debuffs, they can help you get the person out. Geomancer you mentioned earlier for Head of Mischief. I think it was the Head of
Mm-hmm.
Mischief. He's very good. his burn, when you put the burn on like Head of Suffering and like the other heads hit you, it does a lot of damage and helps you take this person out. Another
Yeah.
person that we talked about in, I think it was the Head of Torment, Shemel. If you build him for damage, he ignores defense. So he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really care about how tanky this head is. He's just going to hit very
Yeah.
hard and get your champ out.
Yes.
But unfortunately, like those are not enough on their own, except Newt. Newt is just enough. He does too much damage.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Newt's a monster. He might be a little dude, but he is a big beast when it comes to dealing with suffering. It'd be good to point out too. I forgot to mention it earlier, but out of the 6 Hydra heads, 3 of them are susceptible to poison damage.
Yeah.
Or they will take damage from poisons. You can actually poison them. Those 3 heads are Decay, Torment, and Suffering. So I remember what I was doing is having the hex damage from Thrala was nice, getting hex on there. Every little bit of damage that you could put onto Suffering, to let's say if you're in a scenario where a champion got devoured, every little bit matters for Suffering because that bastard is
Yes.
just so tanky. But also stacking poison on with my Thrala, like when I would A1 with my Thrala, even though it's random, I would deliberately target Suffering to at least land a poison or 2 on him, because then when he inevitably gets his turn, seeing 6 or 7 5% poisons go off at once, that's a nice little chunk of health coming off. And even though Hydra does have a passive where they do decrease the damage they take from poison debuffs, still that's extra damage that's not going to be further nullified by his defense. So every little bit helps. And also we forgot to touch on that he is very slow. So if you get decreased speed on him, you'll feel like at times your team is running a lap on him because he is just so slow.
Yeah, he
But as you
really
touched on
is.
earlier too, the whole extra turn stuff that he'll do, yeah, I've lost a champion or 2 to it, because he'll devour somebody and he'll have both of his cooldowns up, and if he does, he'll open with share suffering, which is where he attacks somebody, puts the pain link out, and gets an extra turn. Then because he gets an extra turn, the devour meter goes down by 1, and then he'll do like thirst for pain, or he'll do his A1, and then just in a matter of a moment, 2 turns off that devour, and we know when we get further on in the Hydra fight, the devour caps at 2. So yeah, if suffering gets him, you need to get that person out in the quickness, or suffering's going to have a free lunch courtesy of your team.
Yeah. Another honorable mention would be HP burn and burn explosions, like champions like Theodore, Sissia, Artak.
Mm-hmm.
Those are very good
Artak,
options. Yeah, Artak. Artak is probably like the best out of them. Those would be good options because they do a lot of damage and they don't really rely on hitting that much, mostly on just like exploding the burns. So those would be the good options. Another way that like you can, I think, deal with suffering would be having blood buffs that we talked about in like the last set. You don't really do damage, but you can deal with the buffs that he puts on the other people, and as you mentioned earlier, the reflect damage that he puts on himself and provoke can cause your nuker to kill themselves. And that happens a lot.
Just a bit, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That happens a lot when your nuker hits very hard. Okay, I think we're done with this head. I don't think there's anything left to talk about it.
Oh, well, we the one thing we didn't touch on was just his decapitation effect. So when he is decapitated, eventually when you get to it, because he's so damn tanky, he will put a 30% max HP shield on each of your champions. That shield is based on that champion's max HP. So when you end up knocking him down, you'll get a little shield to protect you and hopefully help you out. So yeah, definitely not worth the effort and how much you have to go through to decapitate him. It's a nice little consolation prize, I guess, when you finally do. You get a little bit of a shield to keep you safe. But yeah, suffering is just ugh. Yeah, let's move on.
Actually, I really like his decapitation because there have been so many times that I was about to like lose my fight, and Head of Suffering was like low HP, and Head of Wrath didn't have blood buffs, didn't have decreased attack, and he was about to kill me. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna kill Suffering. He gives me the shield, I survive. Like it's good when it's useful, but normally it doesn't really do much, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're right. That's cool. It's situational. That's part of the thing too with Hydra is, you know,
Mm-hmm.
you look at like devour counter or what the HP is on the head. You got to look at where Wrath is with his vengeance counter. There's definitely a lot to be mindful of in Hydra. So to be able to
Yeah.
have that keen eye for it. Not to mention too, I know we're going to be talking about him next, but even if that shield just soaks up some poison damage from Blight, which we know can snowball quite quickly, yeah,
Oof.
I guess I'm not giving that shield its due credit. Maybe it's just because I'm just so tired of dealing with suffering that when he's finally gone, I just don't care at that point. I'm just happy he's gone. I don't care what he left me. He's just gone.
Yeah. I agree. He's an annoying head. If you don't have the if you
Yeah,
don't have the right tools to deal with him, especially if you're early
absolutely.
on. If you're early on, 50 extra resistance is a lot to deal with.
Yeah, yeah, that's especially like when you're just like we have one of our guys here, Lloyd, who
Mm-hmm.
is a new recent raid player. I know he's been fielding a Hydra team recently. He's been one team normal, and yeah, I think between the Torment head just constantly fearing him, and then just suffering, just making just that little bit of extra tankiness for the rest of the team. Yeah, he is such a difference maker when you're against him versus when you're not. So he's yeah, he earned his title for being the most annoying, bastard head in my book for that reason alone. He is a tank.
He really is. Okay. So I guess we can go to the next set. Okay, guys. So this is it for part 1 of Hydra videos. We will be back with Wrigley in the next video, which is part 2. Stay tuned, and I'll see you later.